I really wasn't interested in film. I was more interested in studio arts and painting and art history, the Dadists and the Surrealists and people like Duchamp. The idea that you could pick up a camera and tell a story in images, really compelled me to want to make films. And so then I made films, little films, but I always thought about the sensibility of painters, how politically and socially their work was always influenced by the time that they lived in and why they painted the way they did. And so I thought you could impose those ideas filmically to tell stories. So I always looked for visual cues of how you could tell a story with different film language through the idea of how painters approach imagery. That's kind of how I became a cameraman. Then people asked me, I thought, oh, this would be a cheap way to learn how to make films. I'll shoot films for other people so then I can learn through their mistakes. And then I became a cameraman. But I've always made my own films, documentaries and experimental films. When Europeans came here, like Robbie Muller came with Wim Wenders to shoot American Friend, and Sven Nykvist came to New York to work on Union films, of course I was interested because I knew their work and studied their work, to work with them, to learn through them. Robbie's work was always kind of available light, how he controlled available light. Europeans work more in light from the environment that they're around because they don't have all the lights and time to shoot the way we do, let's say in a Hollywood context. It's changed here too. But they work more from what is there, with different color temperatures, with fluorescent lights, with tungsten light, with daylight, and they like to mix those lights to create an image. How the film saw color. That's always been an interest to me about color temperature through natural sources. And if I compare that to Vittorio Storaro, Storaro was someone that created his own signature in lighting. He created his own lighting look, which would be a very hard rim light, very strong light and shadows, and also movement. He used cranes and dollies in a very Baroque way, that I think grew out of his work with Bertolucci, because Bertolucci was is a great cameraman himself. And then if I compared Storaro and Robbie Muller to Sven Nykvist, he was for me, the father of how you use the least to get the most. He always said to me, we make the light beautiful, but he always did it with the simplest means. And I think that was probably the best school ever for me, was to be on the set and understand kind of what they were doing and help them out in capacity as an operator. Or on La Luna, I was basically the standby director of photography and did some second unit for Storaro. Cinema is the illusion of reality, and I think people have been caught up for too long with feeling that it's a representation of reality. And so I've been very fortunate enough to work with directors that have allowed me to experiment with color. And, when I did an early film like Desperately Seeking Susan, the crew in New York told me, oh, you're weird, Eddie, you're going to get fired, it's green and yellow at night. And I said, yeah, but the fluorescent's green on film and yellow lights are tungsten light. Why can't I push that? Why? I was in the German Expressionism then, so I felt you could push color further to create a certain kind of effect for these characters, that it didn't have to be naturalistic. You could use color as a psychological effect more than just a pictorial look. But I am sensitive about using color in the set that feels like it could emanate from the set or feel like it could be motivated by a different color source, by fluorescence, or if the walls are yellow, then I use yellow. And I also like to create certain restrictions, like working with two colors, a contrast, and contrasting colors or a receding and an advancing color, the way you work with color in op art per se. So yeah, I do think about color more like a painter than, where under fluorescent light everything should look normal. Well, I think everybody has kind of their fingerprint on things, and they have their own sensibility about how they experience light. Today, there are people that are inspirational. When I look at, I love Chris Doyle's work and the kind of risks that he takes. And in France, I feel a real affinity to Eric Gautier, or Bruno Dubinel is a friend. And in Austria, I work with Ulrich Seidel's cameraman. We kind of work together on Ulrich's last two films. I think he's very talented. Wolfgang Thaler, that nobody really knows about here. There's always new people. It's an ongoing experience. It's really interesting to look at films from the different periods of what they grew out of, like the Italian neorealist, and to see the style and their approach to photography were dictated by the conditions that they had to make the films in. And that once filmmakers and cinematographers can learn from that there's not one way to tell a story, and there's not one way to photograph a film. The best education you can have as a cinematographer, as filmmakers, just to watch films.